Hello, and thank you for joining us for Sourcing Trends and Challenges in 2022, highlights from USFIA's annual benchmarking study. My name is Stephanie Gosens, the Communications Director at USFIA, and I have just a few housekeeping items before we get started with today's program. Please note that questions can be submitted at any time during the live program. Simply click on the question header on your webinar control panel, type your text into the box, and hit send. Our presenter will address as many questions as possible at the end of the program. If for some reason we experience a technical difficulty and lose audio, please refer to the chat box for further instructions. As a reminder, all registered participants will receive an email tomorrow with a copy of the slide deck and a recording of the webinar. Now I would like to turn the floor over to Julie to say a few words and introduce the study's author, Dr. Sheng Liu.
Thanks so much for joining us today for the release of the 9th benchmarking survey. These are challenging times for the global economy, so it's no surprise that American brands and retailers are dealing with uncertainty. The top concerns, of course, are inflation, rising cost pressures, and supply chain disruptions. Yet even in the face of these challenges, there's optimism for sourcing and for hiring. I won't delay us any further, and I'm not giving any more hints on the findings in the survey. I'm pleased to introduce and welcome the study's author, Dr. Sheng Liu, Associate Professor in the Department of Fashion and Apparel Studies at the University of Delaware. Thanks to Dr. Liu for his work on this study, and look forward to hearing more details today. So let's get started.
Sure. Thank you so much, Julie, and thank you for joining us this morning. It's always my great pleasure to work with Julie and the U.S. Fashion Industry Association for this annual benchmarking study. And also, we really appreciated great support from all the companies that participated in this study because your input make this research possible. So as usual, this year we are very fortunate to have over 34 leading U.S. fashion companies join the study. And as you can tell, they are very influential players. The vast majority report having more than 1,000 employees. These companies represent various business types in industry, from retailers, brands, to wholesalers and the distributors. We keep the structure of the report the same as in the past. So in general, we would like to know three things from this survey. And one is, companies, their feeling about the overall business environment. And a second, I think this is the most exciting part of the report, that is companies' detailed sourcing strategy, how they're interacting or responding to the business environment. And the third is how companies, they look at trade policy, or how trade policy are affecting companies' detailed sourcing and business strategies. Okay. Yeah, next slide, please. So for this presentation, I think I'd like to achieve two goals. One is definitely to highlight some of our key findings this year, but also I hope I can raise your interest in reading the report. I think it is going to go public this morning or this noon. So yeah, so if you ask me what are your top takeaway from this year's finding, and I would like to mention about these three themes. One is definitely inflation and hiking sourcing costs. I think this is totally understandable given the current macro economic environment. And the second is China and the risk of forced labor involved in sourcing from there. And the third is companies' commitment to sourcing diversification, especially the new excitement of sourcing from Central America Free Trade Agreement area. So I would like to mention these three things in my presentation. Next slide, please. Yeah. So the first issue is how companies look at the entire market environment. And I would like to say that this year's results somehow are different from the past. How so? For example, this year, 3 out of the top 5 challenges are related to the macro economy. This is something really, is unusual. For example, companies concerned about the production and sourcing cost, but also, in the past, issues like inflation and the U.S. Economy, this is always was a kind of medium ranked kind of challenge, but this year it ranks number 3. Okay, and also companies start to feel about the tight job market. So how to find enough talents working for the companies become a kind of growing concern this year. And a second is, because of the implementation of the Uyghur Forced Labor Act, so companies also express growing concern about managing the risk of forced labor. Okay, and this becomes a much more significant challenge this year. And also, we're not totally out of the woods yet for the COVID, so that's why companies continue to report the challenges coming from shipping and the supply chain disruption. Next slide, please. So as an economist, and here I like to share 2 macro economic indicators that can explain companies' concern. One is the so-called consumer confidence index. So put it this way, studies repeatedly show that when consumers decide whether to purchase clothing or not, it's not just about how much they currently earn, but rather how consumers think about their financial prospect. So this is what this index tries to measure. So here you can see consumers kind of express growing worries about their financial status in the future, and this translates into consumers probably they will plan to shop less for clothing. So this is why if you pay attention to the news, kind of more retailers, clothing retailers report growing kind of stock or unsold clothing, and I think this is definitely can be related to this this graph. Next slide, please. And another challenge is definitely inflation. As you can tell, the current inflation level is really unprecedented. And why inflation is not good news for our industry, you can think in this way. So after consumers, they spend on gas, on utility, on mortgage, on food, on grocery, how much are left for clothing? So clothing is regarded more like a discretionary spending. So inflation definitely make consumers discretionary spending much more limited than in the past. Next slide, please. And because consumers are less willing to purchase, the ideal response is we probably can offer more discount to consumers. But unfortunately, this year it's very challenging to do so. Why? Because fashion companies are also facing unprecedented hiking sourcing costs. If you read our last year's report, you may remember the rising sourcing and production costs was already a big concern. However, kind of this year's situation is even worse. Okay, all respondents report very kind of very serious or very significant price increase this year. Next slide, please. So overall, given this kind of business environment, so respondents expect, although more respondents expect a increase of their total sourcing value of volume this year, but at the same time, you can see many respondents expect the growth rate of their sourcing value of volume will become lower this year compared with last year. Last year is more kind of excitement about recovery from COVID, because of vaccine, because of resumption of those economic activities. But this year, kind of companies are more conservative. Next slide, please. And such a sentiment can also be reflected in companies' vision for the next 5 years. So still, I want to say, overall, the majority of respondents still feel quite confident about the next 5 years. But still, but at the same time, we also see some slight increase of those companies that switch to feel neutral or even feel relatively pessimistic about the next 5 years. So definitely the overall market environment, the economy kind of become worsened this year. Yeah, next slide, please. Okay, so given this overall business environment, how companies are sourcing their products, where they source their products. So this is the focus of our benchmarking study. Okay, and next slide. So if you try to run, the trade data, and you may see something like this. So I keep updating this figure regularly, like on a monthly basis. But I have to admit, I really feel a little bit bored about this graph because it really shows little change. But this is the reality, showing still over 70% of U.S. apparel imports come from Asia, about 15 coming from the Western Hemisphere. And this structure is pretty stable. Next slide, please. And our survey results is highly consistent with the macro trade data. As you can tell, for example, 8 out of the top 10 most utilized sourcing destinations are based in Asia. Okay, and the other 2 are based in Western Hemisphere, like Mexico and the U.S. Yeah, next slide, please. That being said, okay, this is the value of this study. It can show you something that macro trade data cannot see. So I will put it this way: I see a lot of changes, some interesting changes at the firm level this year. For example, if you look back, say, since 2018, even before the pandemic, we kind of see, more companies, they start to consolidate their existing sourcing base. Why? Because they feel probably they're facing relatively limited resources, or they really want to strengthen their relationship with key vendors. However, this year, a very notable change is more companies, they commit to diversified sourcing. So you can see a higher percentage of respondents report sourcing from more than 10 different countries this year. Yeah. And how companies are allocating their sourcing value or volume among these 10 more countries. We also see some interesting changes, and this can also be reflected in the macro trade data. One is we find that companies tend to place fewer orders with China. So as you can tell in this graph, so more respondents, currently about at least one third of respondents say they source less than 10% of their total sourcing value of volume from China. And more than half of the respondents, actually this year, they say they source more from Vietnam than from China. And actually, you can see, Vietnam currently, is regarded as a more kind of, significant sourcing destination. More companies place more than 10% of their sourcing value of volume from Vietnam than from China. Okay, so you can definitely tell the difference. Sorry, can you go back to the previous slide? Yeah, and one more thing to add is you can see, CAFTA-DR, member countries of the Central America Free Trade Agreement. Okay, there are more excitement, more interest in expanding sourcing from there, and also more companies report sourcing more than 10% of their products from CAFTA-DR members, and this is a new phenomenon. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, that being said, if you look at companies' sourcing base for textile raw material, because of the nature of textile manufacturing, which is far more, technology and capital intensive than apparel, therefore, companies have fewer options. So Asia as a whole, and especially China, still plays a very, important and critical role as a textile supplier for, apparel imported into the U.S. Okay, or putting this way, even companies, they also try to diversify their textile material sourcing. However, the process will be much longer than apparel. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, as you can tell in the media, so the issue of sustainability, social responsibility is definitely, very important, very hot. And my observation is, these days, you no longer need to educate or remind companies about the importance of these topics. And actually, consistently, for the straight 3 to 4 years, we see companies are willing to allocate more resources into these, these areas. Try to make apparel sourcing more sustainable, more ethical, more socially responsible. One very important indicator I keep watching is how much money, how much budget, companies is willing to allocate to this area. Just like our university, if you have a bigger budget, this means you can do more things. Okay, so companies, they're willing to allocate a bigger budget for sustainability, for ethical sourcing. So they're also trying to do multiple things. For example, how to mapping their supply chain, how to provide more specific training both for their internal employees, but also their vendors. Yeah. Next slide, please. So related to making sourcing more sustainable and ethical is about supply chain mapping. I think this is also a very hot topic. So consistently, and we see companies not only track their tier 1 and their tier 2 suppliers, which means those vendors that provide finished goods and maybe fabrics, but also this year a record high of respondents say they also track their tier 3 suppliers. For example, these vendors that make or manufacture fiber and yarns. So this is a growing trend. Yeah, next slide, please. But also at the same time, companies report some challenges of mapping their supply chain, but also the reason or the type of challenges they face also are evolving. For example, in the past, we hear companies say, oh, it's not, and mostly it's about the nature of the textile and apparel industry. True, still, I think this is true. So it is relatively challenging to fully understand my tier 3 and tier 4 suppliers, but we now know, especially in the past year, there's some, there's some growing number of technologies be developed or be launched to the market that can help companies better understand or more effectively to mapping and their supply chain. But still, I think there are two major challenges. It's not necessarily can be solved by an improvement of technology. One is how to build more trust between importer and the vendors, or how to encourage vendors to more actively respond to importers, to brands and retailers' request for related information. And I can even tell you, my study shows even for some pretty large fashion companies, they do not necessarily have the leverage over their suppliers for compliance, regardless of social or environmental compliance related information. So that's number one. And the second, companies also call for more regulation or more clear guidelines to tell them what exactly you're looking for, what kind of exact documents we need to submit to show you. I think these two areas definitely can be improved further. Next slide, please. Yeah, and also the sourcing strategy or companies' sourcing base will continue to evolve. And as you can tell from this figure, from this table, in the past 2 years, especially since the pandemic, more companies, they kind of try to commit to sourcing consolidation, to more efficiently use their existing resources to achieve sourcing flexibility and agility. Okay, I'm not saying that this trend is totally gone. You can see still nearly 30% of respondents try to do so. However, this year we see a much more significant respondents. They try to continue to diversify their sourcing base, which means try to source from more countries and work with more vendors. Okay, so why companies they're switching their strategies, or what are the different strategies for those who still want to consolidate their sourcing base versus those who want to prioritize sourcing diversification. Next slide, please. So we further ask companies to give us some qualitative comments, just like qualitative study. These comments can really help us gain more insights. So you can see these words marked in red. So they are the key kind of intentions for sourcing diversification. So you can repeatedly see the themes like reduce sourcing risk, especially sourcing risk associated with sourcing from China. And also, how about explore some new sourcing opportunities, especially near sourcing? And even, can I leverage sourcing diversification to reduce sourcing cost? I think this is definitely very relevant and understandable for this year. Next slide, please. And in comparison, for those companies that try to work with fewer vendors, they still try to, one is to improve internal efficiency. Maybe their sourcing base is already large enough, already broad enough, So they want to see if they can achieve more efficiency, through sourcing concentration, and also very importantly, how to strengthen the relationship with key vendors. Like when I talk with brands and retailers, they say they want to really reward those vendors that help them go through the challenging times during COVID. So that's, I think, it explains why they want to cut some vendors. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, so if more companies are willing to or trying to diversify their sourcing, so where they probably will place more sourcing orders. So here you can see there are two key kind of types of vendors. One is those relatively large or kind of relatively capable sourcing base located in Asia. I think they will play a very significant role to to kind of move sourcing orders from China to these countries. So supplies located in India, in Bangladesh, or even Pakistan. So this year they receive a lot of interest. And you can see, like I mentioned at the beginning, expand sourcing from CAFTA DR. There are a lot of new excitements here. Okay, next slide, please. And in comparison, I can see a record high percent of respondents plan to reduce their sourcing from China over the next 2 years. And I think one very important reason is, next slide please, is about the enforcement of a new law, Uyghur Forced Labor Act. Here I'd like to share some response from the companies regarding how they may react to the implementation of this new law. Three things to pay attention to. One is companies say, this new law is a big deal, okay? Or we can say the vast majority, almost all respondents expect some significant impact of this law on their sourcing, on their business operation. Second, this is not surprising. So one reaction is companies will reduce sourcing from China, not only for cotton-related products, because this new law really target any products, finished products and intermediaries made in the Xinjiang region or made by entities list, or by vendors on the entity list. So companies feel that any products, regardless of the fiber type, can be targeted. So they're also reduced sourcing non-cotton apparel from China. And a third, because currently China still plays a very important role as a textile supplier for many Asian countries. So it's not necessarily safe, or put it this way, even imports from other Asian countries still probably will be targeted by the enforcement of this new law. So therefore, companies try to diversify sourcing from regions outside of China. So where they are thinking about, of course, CAFTA DR. So here you can see, this is the macro trade data, which definitely show a significant decrease of U.S. apparel sourcing from China, especially for cotton apparel. So if you ask me, do you think companies may totally suspend sourcing cotton apparel from China? 3 to 4 years ago, it doesn't seem very likely. But based on the latest data, personally, I would say it's not entirely impossible. Or I wouldn't be surprised if more companies try to do so. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, yeah. So a few more words about sourcing from Central America free trade agreements. As some of you may already see from the news, the Biden administration really want to leverage trade as a tool to solve the root causes of migration in Central America. So definitely sourcing from the region involves a lot of potential and a lot of interest. And respondents tell us these trade agreements, the Central America free trade agreements, plays a very important role in encouraging more sourcing from the region, because for example, companies can benefits from the duty-free preference when they source from the region. And also companies actively use this agreement, not only by complying with the yarn forward rules of origin, but also these exceptions to the yarn forward rules. Mechanisms like short supply list accumulation, they also are very actively used by respondents. Especially, I can tell you, for those respondents that utilized short supply, utilized accumulation, they also comply with the yarn forward rule when they can do so. All put in this way, okay, without these exceptions to the yarn forward rule, many orders will be lost, or will simply be placed with Asian countries, with Asian countries, and also still, more than 15% or 70% of respondents say they have to forego the benefits under captive region. Under captive DR, which means when they source from captive DR members, but they did not claim the duty-free benefits. And in general, these respondents are those relatively small in size or place relatively few sourcing orders from the region because they find maybe it's too complicated to really comply with the rules of origin, or the cost of doing so far exceeds the duty saving benefits. So we really can think twice or try to encourage more easy, compliance with the rules of origin in agreement. Next slide, please. So related to the previous slide, so yes, there are a lot of excitement about increasing sourcing from a region, but the next question is how to how to turn this excitement into actual larger sourcing volumes, because as you can tell from this trade data, in terms of the market share, there's still no kind of clear exciting news there. Or the market share of captive DR in the total U.S. apparel imports, there's no clear increase yet. So we can do more to help companies to achieve more potential sourcing from the region. Next slide, please. Yeah, and I can put it this way. Even though the question is how to expand more U.S. apparel sourcing from the region, but the key bottleneck is about the textile raw material. Because because the region, the captive DR region, do not have enough textile materials, from fabrics to yarns. Therefore, companies feel they do not always have enough products to source from the region, or they cannot place all sourcing orders with the region beyond relatively basic items. So this is a bottleneck we can think about how to improve and how to solve. Okay. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, so that's are some of the key findings from this year's study. So as I mentioned earlier, I do want you to read the report, and there are a lot of new topics. Additional topics in the study from companies. Their more detailed 5-year outlook, how they look at the competitiveness of some key leading sourcing destinations, like the rating, the 5-star rating, how they look at Vietnam and Bangladesh as a sourcing base, and their trade policy priorities. So as usual, please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about the findings, and happy to answer any questions. Okay, thank you again.
I'm back. Okay. I actually had a question about the CAFTA DR sourcing. I know that you've written extensively on how we need to get companies to utilize it more. Other than the rules of origin, what do you think we can be promoting to help get more people from sourcing from the region and using those duty-free benefits? Can you go over that in a little more detail?
Sure, that's a very good question. 2 aspects. One is, I think it's very important to really capture the key question. That is, as I mentioned in the presentation, even though here we are talking about how to expand apparel sourcing from the region, but the key bottleneck is about the textile raw material. Why textile raw material is the bottleneck is because making textiles, you need technology, you need machinery, and for developing countries, it's very hard to do so. So currently, many textiles used by garment factories in Central America, they come from the US. However, if you look at what U.S. textile industry is making, they're trying to shift from making apparel-related yarn and fabrics into making more technical textiles, medical textiles, because it's more high-tech driven or maybe it's more profitable. So which means if you keep the current rule unchanged, actually the supply of textile raw material can be even worsened. So the key issue facing garment factories in Central America, also facing fashion brands and retail, is what kind of products can be made in the region. So because of the limited textile raw material supply, so you can see we can only make some relatively basic items like t-shirt, like trousers from Central America. And just like our university, we also want to expand our enrollment. How to do so? In addition to maintain a current, or put it this way, the most effective way is to launch some popular new majors. If you offer some really popular majors like data science, sustainability, of course, you can attract more students. The same if you want to really expand sourcing from the region. Try to allow the region to make more different kinds of products. So I think really focus on the key issue is very important. And at the same time, and this is also from conversation with companies, I have to admit that not all problems facing Central America can be solved by our industry alone. For example, some companies, they report facing some challenges of poor infrastructure from the region, and which means you really need more investment into building some highways or kind of making the logistic more efficient. But overall, I'm still confident. Why? Because if we can expand sourcing volume, this will create more incentives for investment. Okay, but at the same time, and we have to be patient, because if you look at history, especially if we want the market, not necessarily about policy, but really we want to leverage the private sector to solve this issue. It may take time, but the overall kind of prospect is still very promising, very promising. Yeah.
Excellent. So do you think the trend in sourcing diversification will continue to expand, or is there an upper limit on how many sourcing locations companies can use?
Yeah, that's very great. That's another very great question. First of all, I want to say that whether a company chooses to diversify their sourcing base or choose to consolidate is their individual choice. Even for this year, we still see 30% of companies say they try to consolidate their existing source base over the next 2 years. And we find that the choice is largely because of their respective priority. Okay, and also both sourcing diversification and sourcing consolidation will create challenges and opportunities. A more diverse sourcing base, of course, will help you to reduce the sourcing risk, but also will probably increase some sourcing risk to a certain extent, because you don't know, like which country you're currently sourcing from may have some unexpected kind of drama, which may create some challenges. Okay, and also and this is something can be related. As I mentioned in the presentation, more companies, they're currently mapping their supply chain, try to really understand from where my from where my finished garments come from, but also who is making the yarns, who is making the fabrics. And I don't think companies will just sit on these data. They spend a lot of money, a lot of resources to gather, right? And the next step is definitely try to analyze these data and try to figure out what my detailed supply chain look like, how to make it more efficient. And of course, if you're talking about efficiency, some low performance, vendors with low performance probably will be ruled out. So I think diversification and consolidation, they are in relative terms, and they're not necessarily kind of against each other.
Well, since we are talking about sourcing, can you talk about the impact on sourcing from Ethiopia due to the loss of AGOA benefits?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for this great question. And we do cover this topic in benchmarking study. So kind of that's why I keep something untouched in the presentation. So two key takeaways. So as many of you know, that Ethiopia lost its AGOA benefits starting from this year, and respondents tell us that this kind of policy change negatively affect their sourcing from Ethiopia, because Ethiopia, if you look at its competitiveness, duty-free benefits, is a big deal. It's a big deal. Second, I think this is very interesting, but also kind of sent out kind of an alert. So companies say that they're not moving their sourcing orders from Ethiopia to the rest of AGOA members. This is very different. This is very different from, say, reduced sourcing from China, but also China's competitor in Asia will benefit. But it's not about the AGOA. Like the entire AGOA region, okay, is a loser, because Ethiopia lost its AGOA benefits. So this is something we can definitely think about, and how to improve the situation, and how to, so once again, how to leverage apparel trade as a tool to improve the economy, and also to probably enhance and improve human rights in the region. Yeah.
So with all the negative indicators on the economy, why do you think so many companies are still positive about the outlook?
Yeah, that's another very good question. Two comments. One is, even though you look, we're talking about inflation, we're talking about kind of a lot of uncertainty in the economy, but consumers are still spending, at least at the beginning of the year. So that's why, if you look at the macro trade statistics, U.S. apparel imports do enjoy kind of more than 20% growth so far this year. And the second, if you look at these economic forecasts, no matter from the World Bank or IMF, they still feel overall optimistic about the next few years. And even for the current U.S. economy, it still is very different from these traditional recession, especially for the job market, because the job market is still strong. As long as consumers are still spending, we probably can avoid a very long-term recession. So still, many economists are few moderately optimistic about the next 5 years, but also there are a lot of uncertainties here. Okay.
So do you think if the study had been done this summer instead of earlier, you think everybody would have still been optimistic? The current inflation wouldn't have really impacted that because of all these strong indicators?
Yeah, and actually, we collected data from April to June, so still it reflects companies' most recent sentiment about the business environment. Yeah, I don't think there has been some notable changes since our respondents answered the survey. Yeah.
Where do you see the innovative spaces in apparel sourcing? Is it new styles, new fibers, new untapped supplier countries?
Sure, that's a very good question. I can even relate that question to our education, like my favorite course, sourcing and trade. One area for innovation definitely is textile raw material, because consumers pay even growing attention to sustainability, and maybe it's because we have more serious problem of textile waste, thanks to some companies, right? So kind of retailers, brands really want to improve the situation, and then try to expand a category called textile made from recycled material. So how to really leverage sourcing to make more recycled clothing, affordable recycled clothing available on the sales floor, or available to consumer. I think that's a growing area with growth potential. And another area I'm very confident about is technology. And even this year, we see for example, more companies, they start to leverage technology to improve their supply chain transparency. And in our education, we're also gradually launching digital tool into our courses to help students learn how to develop clothing using 3D technology, not necessarily have to make physical prototypes. And companies definitely are also leveraging, like say PLM or even AI technology to enable them to do something they cannot do in the past, but also to better to maybe understand their consumers or improve the overall efficiency of sourcing. Yeah, so sustainability, innovation in textile, recycled textile raw material, and technology. I think they're the two themes I personally are very interested in.
Speaking of sustainability, can you talk a bit more about the types of sustainability activities that are receiving more budget and more attention this year?
Yeah, so in our study, we do not ask companies where you are spending more money, but definitely they have a bigger budget. And we also see companies, they try to specifically, expand their activities in several areas. And I assume that these are the areas that the bigger budget will help to support. One is definitely hiring more professionals, especially in the area of enforcement, because once again, enforcement, they're no longer just a very kind of casual activity, casual area. It requires very professional and specific knowledge. Second, training, both to help their employees, their internal employees, better understand the new regulations, but also to reach out more actively and purposefully reach out to their suppliers to help their suppliers better understand the expectations from the US. Yeah, so I think these three areas are very important, and also investing in new technologies to help them to better mapping their supply chains and making their sourcing more sustainable. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, that actually wraps up our questions for today. I want to encourage everybody, I promise we didn't make Dr. Liu reveal all of the findings in the report. It will be up on our website a little later today. Thank you so much for this informative discussion, Dr. Liu. This does conclude today's webinar. Please do not hesitate to reach out to either USFIA or Dr. Liu if you have any questions. And we look forward to hosting you at the next USFIA event.
Thank you. You have a great day.
Okay.